this kind of describes us, doesn't it? It's, many of us have been together for so many years. And we've watched these others' lives and, seen, gone through things, All of us have scars. We're like a broken vase that God's put together, and as He's put us together, He's filled the cracks in with gold. Isn't that amazing? We're like that. Individuals and a whole church has a history of, right? It's people having gone through situations, and yet here we are. We haven't fallen apart. We're remended, but with gold, the gold of God. And what that calls for with each new piece of our journey is just to keep forging ahead with trust. We've got to keep trusting God. And so I call this one trusting God to lead us safely. We're not going to let someone lead us that we don't quite really trust. Right? We're going to hold back and maybe let someone else go ahead of us and see if it works out for them. And then maybe we'll slip in the line. But how do you know God can lead you safely? There's only one way, that's experience. Right? So at some point we're going to have to get in the line and just go. Okay? At first, your journey might be somewhat by blindness, in other words, or lack of experience. It might be just you're kind of going on other people who've experienced it. You're kind of, going at their word. But at some point, we're going to have to jump into this thing called life and start, experiencing it for ourselves. Okay? And that's, we're watching it, our young people go through this, as they go into the next phase of their life, from, childhood, adolescence, into adulthood, okay? And it's not the easiest thing. I remember when I was 16, you're older than that, but I remember when I was 16, my mother was, talking about stirring the nest. My mother was on to me, or at me, after me, to go out and, get a job. As one of your typical lazy, teenagers. Vicky was there, okay? Go get a job, go get your, social security number. It wasn't assigned to us in those days, you had to go get one. And so, but I remember that, and then I got my first job, selling these plaques of independence or Constitution door to door. Go out there knocking on doors, and I hated that. I'm not a salesman. And I'm a 16-year-old kid, my first job selling door to door. I remember we'd be selling into the it would be dark. In the neighborhoods, and the dark were interrupting people's dinner time or early TV time. I remember that. But fancy that, I actually sold a few. I sold a few. I don't know why, but I did. But it's in transition. Well, Christian life is like that, isn't it? It's not, doesn't come always easy. Doesn't come, suddenly. You don't just get it like right now. It's a step-by-step thing. Okay? That's how it was meant to be. Because when you have walked with the Lord and you've gotten a few cracks here and there, and He's had to fill them up with gold, at least you're looking back over your life and you're beginning to see a history that why is that filled with gold? Because God did that. It's filled with gold because He wants you to keep going. And so I want us to go over to Deuteronomy chapter 8 here this morning. Deuteronomy 8. I'm just going to pick out a few things here.
Mike, speak up a little bit.
Okay. Deuteronomy chapter 8. And just pick out a few things here, maybe of interest. Just my thoughts on this. Keep in mind that the children of Israel had already journeyed their 40 years, so they already have by now a history. But what's different is the ones that were leading and making the decisions or calling the shots or were in charge underneath Moses was the adults, the parents. Now, they've all died. So the former leaders are dead. And now the children have grown up, many of them have grown up, and now they're the new generation to come in and continue this journey forward. And so Deuteronomy is the second giving of the law to this new generation. So they, in many respects, they have to be reminded of what their parents failed to do. So he says here in chapter 8, verse 1, all the commandments which I command thee this day shall ye observe, to do that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land which the Lord swore unto your fathers. The same promises were given to their fathers. Why didn't their fathers go in? Why didn't they believe? Well, that was their choice. They looked at life's situations. They looked at the giants in the land, and they began to excuse themselves from going forward. Problems of life became large like the giants, and they chose not to go in. So now here we have this new generation, and Moses said, are you going to make the same mistake? Or are you going to go in? He says, you better decide what you want to do here. And thou shalt remember all the way which the Lord thy God led thee these 40 years in the wilderness to, get this, to humble thee, and to prove, New King James says to test, I like that word, to humble thee and to test thee, to know what was in thine heart, whether thou wouldst keep his commandments or not. Why are these tests there? Well, it wasn't that the Lord didn't know what you were going to choose, it's that we don't know what we're going to choose. We're the ones that don't know. So he throws the tests at us so that we can know just how strong our faith is. And one of Philip's favorite proverbs is Proverbs 24:10. Tim, would you like to look that up? Proverbs 24:10. I'll have you read that. One of his favorite proverbs is that, because it has to do with the strength or quality of our faith. And so here we have these kids who are under the guidance of their parents who made a colossal mistake in not steering their children toward faith, setting the example, and going on in, leading their children in. So, and thou shalt remember all the way which the Lord thy God led thee these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble you and to test you, to know what was in thine heart. That was for their sake, their benefit, whether thou wouldst keep his commandments or not. And so, talking about the strength of your faith, what does Proverbs 24:10 say?
If you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small.
Yes. So,
It has a circled and underlined.
it's circled and underlined.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. But I tell you, if we faint when these things push at us, then there's a clear telltale sign that our faith isn't as strong as maybe we had thought it was or had hoped it was. But how are we to know unless the test was there? So he tested them 40 years. And he would take them to, there would be distances where they didn't have water for a while. They had just had water, but now they've broken camp and they're on the march again. And during that time, they're complaining that there's no water. Well, he just gave them water. So he's already shown, right, that he can give them water. He can lead them to the water. He's already shown that. So they're now going further into the wilderness, and they're complaining that there's no water. Well, if God was gracious enough to take you to water once, or however many times, he's going to do it again. They were a very impatient people. And they were not ready to appreciate the land of promise. They just weren't ready. And the more they marched around that desert, the more they unreadied themselves to go into the promised land. They just stayed locked into an immature state of mind. God says, you don't deserve this promised land. If you can't learn to trust me now, how do you learn to trust me in the promised land? And so we have these children grown up. He said, this is why during these 40 years I tested you. In verse 3, and he humbled thee, and suffered or allowed thee to hunger, and fed thee with manna, which thou knewest not. Neither did thy fathers know, that he might make thee know that man doth not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord doth man live. Jesus quoted this, didn't he? And so every step of the way they had to lean on God and trust God. But he was doing it so that it would build their faith and reinforce their faith. Now you know what's interesting is this wasn't a God that they didn't see in action already. How did they get out of Egypt in the first place? It wasn't like they didn't know anything about the power of God. They had already witnessed it. How many plagues, Noah?
12 or 10.
10 plagues. So at least 10 times. 10 times God demonstrated that he meant business. I'm going to release you. And in the meanwhile, he destroyed one of the most powerful armies at that time. So why wouldn't that have been enough? Enough proof? Well, let me ask you this. How many times has God delivered us from a situation? And then we just never worried after that. We never worried again. It doesn't work that way, does it? It doesn't work that way. We worry again. So we can understand what was going on, right, with Israel. From water hole to water hole. Okay? And so, but the whole intent was for God to bring them to a level of maturity where you can just breathe deep with full confidence. Okay? Let's try that. Let's breathe in and breathe out. Doesn't that feel good? Just air in and air out. Just kind of a relaxing, sensation. So that's what we wanted them to do. Relax. I got this. I promised I would take care of you. All you need to do is just fall back into my arms and relax. I'll do the heavy lift. I'll do the work. You just got to do the trusting. Well, not as easy as we think sometimes. But that's why we need the test. If we faint in adversity, our faith is small. And we need some more testing. Okay? We need more testing. So let's continue to read. Verse 4, thy raiment waxed not old upon thee, neither did thy foot swell these 40 years. Wouldn't that be nice if your feet never swelled up for 40 years? Okay? Your clothes never wore out. Their shoes never wore out. That's kind of unusual, isn't it? God was demonstrating to them that, look, when I said I would take care of you, when I took you by the hand and led you as my firstborn son out of Egypt, I did so as a father taking care of his son. And so, did you really think I was just going to drop you in the middle of the desert and leave you there? Well, do you know what? That was part of the complaint. Remember? Can he furnish us a table here? He's brought us out here to die in the wilderness. That was some of the complaints. And so the leadership had to keep prodding them on and coaxing them on and saying, look, Moses got it. Moses finally got it. He went through his own training course. But he finally got it. Now he tries just to pass that confidence on to the people. But Moses' experiences could not be a substitute for their experiences. All of us have to experience this for ourselves. But here's what we can do. I can see you tested, and that can serve to strengthen me. And one of the things that really helps me and strengthens me is when I see you overcoming a test and a challenge. And you're just telling the devil, I'm not going to buckle. Not on this one. I'm not going to buckle. That encourages me. And when we do this church-wide, collectively, when enough members go through their own stuff, and they just tell the devil to get lost, okay, Yeah, should we tell the devil to get lost? You know, he's already lost, but anyway, tell him to get lost anyway. Okay. Then, your faith is growing. And we all watch that. We all see that. And it strengthens all of us because collectively as a church, we continue to march forward through this desert that we call life. Okay? And we're looking for the next water hole. We're looking for the next blessing from God by promise. And so we are learning this thing as we go along. The problem is submission. The problem is realizing who's in charge. The people wanted to take charge. They actually wanted to unelect Moses and elect someone else that would march them right back, get a load of this, right back to Egypt, where they would probably have a warm welcome, wouldn't they? They'd have a nice warm welcome, Brother Ben. Oh, just red carpet all the way. No, I think, Vanessa, I think they would probably have been slaughtered on the spot. Slaughtered. They humiliated, well, God humiliated that entire nation. So what would be the point of turning around and going back to Egypt? Well, actually, some of the people wanted that to happen. They wanted to kill Moses and elect someone else to take them back into Egypt. Because they remembered the fine dining there. Like we had yesterday. That was pretty good food, actually. Pretty good food.
Yeah.
Fine dining. Okay? The leeks and the garlics. Okay, what else? Was onions or something like that. Okay? But they remembered all the nice food that they had. Yeah, but what were they forgetting? The taskmasters, the whippings, beatings, the rough treatment. Oh, they forgot all about that. You think that would not be the case if they did go back? If you go back into the world, you think it's going to be easy? It's not going to be easy. It's going to be worse because not only are you now place yourself out of the protection of God, and you'll have your conscience wearing at you for knowing better. You know, you leave the world, you serve God, you go back into the world, you now know better. And that's going to eat you alive. Okay? Never mind God's pulling his protection back. And so he's pointing this out. Why should you trust God to leave you safely? So he's reminding them. He said, God did this to test you. Do you remember that your clothes, your shoes never wore out over 40 years? We can't forget these blessings. We can't soon forget these benefits. You've got to keep bringing them up in your mind. You've got to keep them fresh. How that God delivered you, God answered prayer, God helped you, or answered a prayer on the behalf of someone else. You've got to keep them fresh. That's what keeps you going. So he says, thou shalt also consider in thine heart that as a man chastens his son, so the Lord thy God chastens thee. So they could understand a man chastening his son, couldn't they? So you correlate that, and you look at yourselves as God's son, and his need to chasten us. Therefore thou shalt keep the commandments of the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways, and to fear him, as a son would do. For the Lord thy God bringeth thee into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains, and depths that spring out of valleys and hills. These were important to them. These things would be crucial for life. Right now, they were not farmers. They were not planting things. Okay? They were feeding off of what God provided, the manna. And occasionally, after they griped and complained, he'd send quails. Remember that? But you also remember that they complained and griped that they had this lousy manna. Oh, so you don't appreciate what God is doing for you. All right, well, here's what I'll do. I'll send the quails and the fowls that you are crying after. Here they come. So they start raining birds. Okay? And they start cooking them and eating them. And they were gorging themselves on this. Okay? And that's when the shoe dropped. While their mouths were still full of quail, so much so that it's coming out their nostrils, God dropped the shoe, and a lot of them died. You ungrateful rebels. Okay? The last thing they remembered was God providing for them. And they woke up probably in an unhappy place. Okay? But they went there with their bellies full by God's promises. Okay? We never want to reach that place where we're just ungrateful to our God. And so it says, He brings you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and depths that spring out of the valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley. So eventually they would till the land, they would farm the land. Eventually they would have their herds, their flocks, and they would grow, they would become farmers as well. He says fig trees, pomegranates, a land of oil, olive, and honey. Sounds so delicious, doesn't it? I've had figs. How many of you have ever had a fig? You've had a fig. They're kind of a different fruit, aren't they? If you get past all the seeds. I remember when I was a kid, maybe Samuel's age, my uncle and aunt there in, where were they, what's that prison?
Alcatraz? Alcatraz?
No, not Alcatraz, no.
Shawshank?
No. I forget now, but he was a prison guard there. There was a little village outside that prison, and they had some land there. I remember from the beach, it was the beach, and then the road, and then a little bit of land, and then these wooden stairs that went up this hill. And they lived at the top of this thing, and there was a fig tree, there was dates, there were dates, I had dates. In other words, all that California provides, right? Say all of this, just right there for the picking, and then the beach across the street. But here's the kind of food that they would be looking forward to, they would be growing. But also, a lot of this, they didn't have to start from scratch, you remember? He was going to bring them into a land, chasing the people out who were the previous occupants, who had already dug the wells, who had already planted the vineyards. And so basically, it was what we call, kids, a turnkey operation, where the house is built. You just put the key in the door and turn it. It's already there, waiting for you to occupy and to live. Okay? And so this is what their God promised to do to them. But before they got there, they had to learn to believe Him, to trust that He was leading them safely. And so He says, a land, verse 9, wherein thou shalt eat bread without scarceness, thou shalt not lack anything in it. A land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills thou may dig brass. So as they would begin to mine the ore, they could start making weapons, they could start making plowshares and all the instruments of farming and agriculture. It's all right there for you. And when you look at Israel, Israel, by the way, is about the modern day Israel is about the size of the state of New Jersey. One of our smallest states. But to hear him describe it, it's a very wealthy land. And in case you're thinking like I used to think, when you think of Israel, are you thinking desert? Are you thinking arid? Well, there is that, just like there is in Montana. But there's also luscious greenery. There's trees. There's, as I said, the vineyards. And so there's a very, and they knew how to work the land. The Lord blessed them, and they knew how to grow the crops. So, Mark Twain, I don't know if you knew this, but Mark Twain actually visited Israel during its low peak. Not a lot of people were there at the time. And so he got there and he said, the land's pretty scarce of people. Well, there's always a presence of Jews there. There were Arabs there. There were people there. But it wasn't flourishing. But later on, the Lord would begin to stir the nest, stir the hearts of Jews from all over the world, and they would begin to, what they call aliyah, which means to go up. In other words, they would go up to the land of Israel. They would leave their host country and go up to the land of Israel and live there. And so the Lord began to pour a lot of His people back in preparation for what would happen in 1948. But they had to get there somehow. But when Mark Twain was there, it wasn't really populated. And he noted that in one of his writings. But he says here, when thou hast eaten and art full, then thou shalt bless the Lord thy God for the good land which he hath given thee. Always want to be thankful for what God has given. Always. And there's something to be thankful for. Can you think of something right now that you're thankful for? Oh, we could think of a lot of things. Okay? Hold that close to your heart. Never forget it. Okay? There'll be more. Okay? There'll be more things to be thankful for. But that's what he's saying. If you're going to appreciate all that I'm about to give you, then you've got to be thankful for it. Beware, he says, on the flip side of this, beware that thou forget not the Lord thy God in not keeping his commandments and his judgments and his statutes, which I command thee this day. Nothing will destroy the memory of God's goodness more than to move away from his truth, to move away from his commandments. What keeps us close to God is our obedience to him. Amen? When we're obedient to God, it's a good feeling because we know that we're pleasing him. When we move away from God, you know what? It's not a good feeling. And we know the difference, don't we? We totally know the difference. So he knew that they had the capacity to obey. They also had the capacity to not obey. So these are warnings to this new generation. Don't make the same mistakes as your parents, who are not occupying the land as you are. And so, beware that thou forget not the Lord thy God in not keeping his commandments and his judgments and his statutes, which I command thee this day. Lest when thou hast eaten and art full, and hast built goodly houses and dwell therein, and when thy herds and thy flocks multiply, and thy silver and thy gold is multiplied, and all that thou hast is multiplied, then thy heart be lifted up, and thou forget the Lord thy God, which brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage. And that's exactly what happened. What he's telling them not to do, they did. You know, kids, when mommy and daddy tell you not to do something, what do? You do that something. Almost like you didn't believe in their warnings. Okay? We're not talking about little kids here. We're talking about grown-ups. We're just older kids. Right? We're just older kids. And so, he's talking to adults. He says, when I have fulfilled my promises to you, when I have made good and I've kept my word, not if but when, don't settle in and think that this is all from your hand and you begin to not appreciate the obedience part. Oh, you're taking in the goodies and the blessings, but oh, the obedience part, well, I don't know about that. You know, watch the blessings disappear real quick. You read Kings and Chronicles, and you see what happened to these people. The very warnings here were not heeded continuously. And they began to look around, and you know, Yahweh wasn't all that special anymore. Maybe this God will give us something. Maybe this God will be a benefit to us. It didn't work that way. God's jealous. God is jealous. And anyone who has come back in from out there, back to serve the Lord, ought to understand that all the while God was jealous that they weren't serving him for all that he had done. And count the blessings that God worked to bring them back in. Because there's some who probably will never make it. They just won't make it. Another proverb, Andrew, something to the effect that he that hardens his neck, repeatedly, continuously, is going to find out that one day he's hardened it one time too many. I'm paraphrasing. One time too many, and then it's going to be without correction, without remedy. What does that mean? That means that God is moved on to someone else in the attempt to help them. Your window closed. It's slammed shut. And so, if you've experienced the drifting from God, and God brought you back. Count your blessings. Amen. Don't want to name names, but anyway. All of us drift, don't we? We all drift. Some further than others. Some have harder hearts than others. We just praise God for His goodness. So he goes on to instruct this younger generation. He says, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage, who led thee through that great and terrible wilderness, verse 15, wherein were fiery serpents and scorpions, and drought, where there was no water, who brought thee forth, brought forth water out of the rock of flint, who fed thee in the wilderness with manna, which thy fathers knew not, that he might humble thee, and that he might test thee to do thee good at thy latter end. How many times have I said, God is really on our side? He really is. Through every trial, God is on our side. He hasn't abandoned. If you have not abandoned God, and you know you haven't, then don't look at the trial necessarily as a punishment, but as a reinforcement of your faith for your good. He doesn't want us to get comfortable. He doesn't want us to just kind of plateau in this thing. Okay? Because if we're not escalating our faith, if we're not growing our faith, and there's a verse that talks about this in the book of Jude, then we have a tendency to just level off. And we're riding upon yesterday's faith, and however strong that was. Well, you know that you kids have ridden bicycles. You know that the bicycle has a pair of pedals, and it's got a sprocket, and it's got a chain on it. And you can build up momentum by pedaling that bike really fast. And then you stop pedaling. How far are you going to go? You're only going to go with the momentum that you had before you stop pedaling. Gradually, the bike is going to, as you coast, the bike is going to slow up and stop and fall over. Okay, right? You've got to keep pedaling. You've got to keep pushing. Okay? And that's why the Apostle Paul said, he says, I press toward the mark. I push toward the mark. I strain toward the mark. Samuel, I pedal toward the mark. I pedal toward the mark. I'm pedaling that bike. I'm pushing that bike. I'm not coasting. For the prize of the high calling of God. Everyone who gains the prize will have had to push through all the obstacles. They're not going to coast into the city. No coasters. Amen? No coasters. So, he says, I'm really on your side. I'm doing all this to bring you to a humbled mindset so that you know that I'm in charge. And you also learn to trust that I want to do you good. I really want to do you good. At the very end, the outcome, I want it to be the very, very best. And thou say in thine heart, my power. He's still warning them of an attitude that they should not develop. And thou say in thy heart, my power and the might of my hand hath gotten me this wealth. What? Where did that one come flying in from? From a lack of sticking close to the Lord. And a lack of humility. Not seeing yourself as God sees you. But thou shalt remember the Lord thy God. For it is he that giveth thee power to get wealth. Amen? Two things you should thank God for every day. Your health, and because of your health, your job. Right? You go to your job, you're able to work your job because of the health he's given you to do the job. Those two things. Always, never take for granted. For it is he that giveth power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant, which he swore to thy fathers, as it is this day. And it shall be that if thou do at all forget the Lord thy God, and walk after other gods, and serve them, and worship them, I testify against you this day that you shall surely perish. One thing about God, he's up front. He's up front. He doesn't hold anything back. He's totally honest. He's totally honest. He'll tell you what you're going to get if you serve him. He'll also tell you what you're going to get if you don't serve him. So no surprises. No surprises. So he says, as the nations which the Lord destroyed before your face, so shall you perish, because you would not be obedient unto the voice of the Lord your God. Well, there it is. So, conditions for the blessings and consequences for failing to want to keep serving God. Who would not want to serve our God? Read about that God in the Bible. Who in their right mind would not want to serve God? Who on this planet, as a collective group, are so brain dead and are so misfits and ridiculously foolish and have a mental disorder as that they would not want to serve the God of the Bible, who's proven himself? He has the capability, he's got the power, he can do whatever he wants, and he has. Who would not see that for all that it is?
Most of the planet.
Most of the planet.
98.9.
I'm going to wrap it up in one word. Liberals. There you have it.
All right, Tamara, let's go.
You can go, I'll stay.
Brain dead. Think that they know more than God. Well, there's a scripture, I think it's in Isaiah, that says hell has enlarged itself. Basically, it had to get larger. You know, there's only so many spots in the city. The city is of a certain size and will hold a certain capacity. Okay? It's like a roster for a team. Every team can only have the maximum amount of people on the team. Okay? It's not an open-ended thing. Everyone gets, let's just say, 40 players. Okay? Every team. And so, if you want to be on a particular team, you have to fight and scratch and practice and sacrifice to get a uniform and then to play. And then that's not even the end of it. So you made the team. So you're saved. So you're wearing the uniform. You're scripturally baptized. Okay? You get some playing time. That's your life. That's your service. But what are they all looking for at the end of the season? The championship. Okay? The principles that we see in the Bible are all right there, what we see in everyday life. Okay? And only those that work hard get the championship. Like Lydia's team. They played hard this year. They won, I don't know what their record was. 6-1. But that tells me that those little kids, you know, were listening to their coaches as to, you know, form and technique and how to play as a team, how to tackle hard and, you know, catch a ball, throw a ball, run their plays. That they listened and they formed a team, a unit, and marched through their season one victory after another. A loss for good measure, that keeps you hungry. Setbacks, problems, trials keep us hungry or good again. Okay? And so they're now in the championship. That's how this Christian life works. But along the way, we trust God that He's leading us safely. We don't ever doubt His leadership. Amen? Never doubt it. He's given not one reason to doubt that leadership. Not one. So when He leads, we follow. Now there's a blessing in this as I close. It's found in Romans chapter 8. And I believe it's verse 14. We want to pay attention to this. Romans 8:14. This is very, very important. Chapter 8 is just rich with a picture of what we need to do to get where God wants us to be. Chapter 8, verse 14. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God. Now keep in mind, you're only led by the Spirit of God if you let Him lead you. If you're not letting Him lead you, guess what? You're not. You're not being led of the Spirit. Okay? So take it for granted that he's talking about those who are letting Him lead. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God. Why? Because of the unity. Just as in the Old Testament, you keep my commandments, you be obedient to me, and I'll give you, I'll pour it on, I'll supply everything your heart can imagine and more. Just stay tight, stick with me, I'll get you there. So if you're led by the Spirit of God, you then will end up being the son or a son of God, an heir of God. You'll get shoes that never wear out, right? Clothes won't wear out. You know, you're going to get all of this, and then some. And so he goes on to talk about, of course, we've read this many, many times, that there's a certain expectation, a certain anticipation of who the sons of God will be. And so that an observer who would stand there, I have a message on this, an observer who's standing there watching the rapture actually take place all around him. He's seeing these, angels swooping down and just snatching people off of the earth. He's seeing people, pulled up out of their graves. He's seeing all this happen around him. He's going, what in the world? What is going on here? Well, that's God collecting His elect. That's God sending out the angels as He promised. Okay? He's collecting His sons. Okay? He's collecting those who are going to reign with Him in the city. That's what's happening. And so he says, for the earnest expectation, verse 19, the earnest expectation, the anticipation, the building anticipation of the creation waited for the manifestation. Who will they be? The manifestation, the revealing of the sons of God. I want to be in that group. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. I don't want to be someone who's watching it all happen. You missed it then. If you're watching it happen, you missed it. So, because this thing's going to happen, how does Paul say it? In the twinkling of an eye. Okay. So that's what we want to do. So, we need to just trust God to get us there safely. He's our commander-in-chief, and He keeps all of His promises. Shall we stand this way?